All right, everyone, let's take a look at the global circulation model one more time. I'm going to draw it here for you on the whiteboard with the idea that you can follow along in your notebooks as well. And we'll just draw a globe here. We'll make a little bit of an equator on there. If you recall, the sun heats the Earth most intensely in the tropics here, and so the center of that is the equator. There is therefore rising air at the equator because warm air rises. That would create a surface of low pressure. So we're going to put L's here for low pressure all the way along the equator. And this is going to give us our first label. And I'm not going to spell it all the way out here, but this is going to give us the ITCZ, which is the Intertropical Convergence Zone. That's a band of low pressure along that way. And then I'm going to draw here on the side the rising air from the low that goes north and south from the equator and then descends around 30 degrees north and south. And we label this the Hadley cell. I apologize, my writing isn't any neater on this whiteboard, but at least we've got it on there, Hadley, Hadley cell. And that is both above and below, north and south of the equator. And this descending air is air that is warmed by compression because it's descending. And so we identify that as high pressure. There's a band of high pressure that is in various locations. Now this high is not as much a band as the ITCZ is, but there's high pressure along this area here about 30 degrees north and about 30 degrees south of the equator. And what we observe here is that high pressure is because the air is going descending. It's dry and warm air, so we notice a lot of desert formation along this band as well as here. And then there's a band of low pressure about 60 degrees north and south, again with air rising, in this case heading south and descending as part of that low. And then this rising air at 60 degrees north and south also continues up to the pole where we have a polar high. So we've got the Hadley cells here, we've got mid-latitude cell, sometimes called the Ferrell cell, Ferrell, I believe, and then the polar cell. I've already covered these circulations in an earlier video. You can go back and review that if you want. Let's continue the loop here. So we have our north and our south pole circulation on here as well. And notice that none of this is to scale and that my distances are a little bit inexact, but that's because I'm drawing it out for you instead of making it a fancy scientific illustration. So now, first let's talk about what would happen on the surface of the Earth. So we're not talking about this upper circulation here in the troposphere. We're talking about the surface of the Earth here. The pressure gradient force, the force difference of high pressure and low pressure would lead wind to form. And this is on a non-rotating Earth. On a non-rotating Earth, and I'm actually going to put this here. I'm going to use blue to mark this out. And I'm not going to do a lot because I want to just sort of sketch it in here. On a non-rotating Earth, we would see the wind move from areas of high pressure to areas of low pressure, from areas of high pressure to areas of low pressure, like that. Sure. Instead, the Coriolis force deflects winds to the right in the northern hemisphere and to the left in the southern hemisphere. So it still moves from the high to the low, but it's deflected to the right. And so I'm drawing the winds on here as moving, starting from the high and moving towards the low, but moving to their right. And so the major winds here then between the 30 to 60 degrees are out of the west, and we call these westerlies. Here we see from the high to the low, and from the high to the low it would be this way, but it moves to its right, so it takes a right turn, and it moves like this. Now the Coriolis force or Coriolis effect is less pronounced at the equator, so these don't quite make it all the way to a full 90-degree turn. They come here out of the northeast instead of out of the straight out of the west like we observe here. And then up in the polar regions, it goes from the polar high towards the subpolar low, but again it's deflected to its right. And notice that the direction here is opposite the direction in the mid-latitudes. So we have labels we can put on here, and I'm running out of a space a little bit here. So I'm actually going to create space for these winds to label here. I'm sure in your notebooks you will have more space available to you. So let's put some labels on here now for these winds. These are called Polar Easterlies. Important rule to remember is we name winds in terms of the direction they come out of. So a wind coming out of the east is an easterly. It goes to the west. These are just the westerlies. They don't have a latitudinal name. You could call them the mid-latitude westerlies, but they're just called the westerlies. And these are called the northeast, NE for short, northeast trade winds. Called the trade winds because they were instrumental in getting early European explorers across the Atlantic Ocean. And so if you were up here in Europe and you wanted to go across to North America, you couldn't go straight across because the westerlies were right in your face the whole way. But if you went south, down like off the south coast of Portugal and Spain, you could then catch these trade winds and head off down and end up in the Caribbean. So that's how the geography of the global circulation influenced those early explorers, colonists, and including the slave trade got involved in this. Now let's do the same thing here in the southern hemisphere, and I apologize, it's a little bit cramped with the way I drew my globe. I should have made my globe a little bit less squished on the bottom, but you can get the idea here. Now again, remember in the southern hemisphere, the Coriolis force works in the opposite direction, and so that means it would go from the high to the low, but it's deflected to the left. Remember, it's deflected to the right of where it would go in the northern hemisphere, but southern hemisphere, it's deflected to the left. And so those winds you can see there are converging. And so that should tell us right away why this is called the Intertropical Convergence Zone, right? So as they come together there, then there's going to be the winds sort of smashing into each other, and that will increase that convergence, and you'll see more uplift in that cell. Here we'd move from high to low, but again, let me neaten this up here a little bit first. We've got a polar high here at the South Pole, and we've got a band of low pressure at around 60 degrees. I don't really have a lot of room here, so I want to make some more space for the arrows to go in here. There we go. That's a high. That's an H. Okay. So in this mid-latitude zone here, so between 30 degrees highs and 60 degrees lows, the wind would move from the high to the low, but it's diverging to its left, and it's a strong, so again, this would be straight, and moving to its left is this way. It's left of the way the arrow would go. And so these then are also westerlies. Again, the dominant wind flow on the surface of the Earth between 30 degrees south and 60 degrees south is out of the west. And then here in the polar region, it would go from the high to the low, but instead it gets diverted to its left. And so it goes like this. And again, this is hard to see with the way this is kind of cramped in here. I apologize for not creating more space. We call this, again, Polar Easterlies. So put all together then, and I think Westerlies got cut off a little bit here, but you get the idea. So kind of a mess of a diagram. What we end up with then is Easterlies, Easterlies, Westerlies, Westerlies. These are the northeast trade winds. These are the only ones that aren't mirrored perfectly because they are out of the south and east. And so these are the southeast trade winds. So there we have it. There is our model of global atmospheric circulation. This presumes, by the way, that we have a uniform surface. Of course, continents and ocean differences get in the way of this a little bit, but it's remarkable how consistent these patterns are on a global scale. You can see them especially over the major oceans of the world that we tend to observe these phenomena on average. You can have differences happening with periodic weather events on a week-by-week basis, but if you look at the averages of circulation, we really see these patterns emerging around the world very consistently. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that helps us understand some of these patterns.